Good evening, and welcome to another episode of the WVU Alumni Webinar Series. Tonight, we'll be joined by Dr. Nathan Sorber. He's a senior scholar in the Center for the Future of Land-Grant Education at WVU, an associate professor of higher education administration, and a department chair in the College of Education and Human Services. He attended Bucknell and Vanderbilt universities before completing his Ph.D. in higher education from the Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Sorber has written extensively on land-grant colleges, the history of American higher education, and the unique relationship between higher education and American capitalism. In fact, he is the author of Land-Grant Colleges and Popular Revolt, The Origins of the Morrill Act and the Reform of Higher Education, as well as the co-author of several books covering higher education and land-grant colleges. I personally am quite lucky to have studied and researched with Dr. Sorber during my time at WVU, and I am looking forward to asking him several questions tonight.
Hi, Meredith.
Hello, it's great to see you.
Good to see you as well. Very excited to be here this evening.
Well, we have been waiting for this conversation for quite some time. So as a guest in our 5 questions series, you'll be presented with 5 big questions regarding your research and your role here at WVU, followed by a round of rapid fire questions to help our audience get to know you a little bit better as a person. And then if time allows, we'll even throw you a few questions from the audience. How does that sound?
Sounds great. I'm ready.
All right. So let's get started. So we, in preparing for this conversation with you, we know a lot about your background and your expertise, and I previewed a bit of that before you came on screen for our audience. And, we hear often about WVU's land grant designation, but a lot of our viewers might not know exactly what that means and why it's significant. So could you start by taking us all back to basics, back maybe to the 1800s, and explaining what it means to be a land grant institution?
Sure. I would be happy to go back into the 1800s. So, West Virginia University, like other land grant institutions, got their start from what's called the Morrill Act of 1862, or the Federal Land Grant Act. And that was really the first time that the federal government really got involved in providing resources for American higher education. We should probably step back, though, because in our current environment, we've been, really paying closer attention to the reality that the resources that were used to build the land grant system were really federal land. And that was land that was removed, sometimes forcefully, from Aboriginal and Native American populations. So it's good to remember that millions of acres of native land were the resources that led to the establishment initially of our institution. So I think we always need to remember that. But the Morrill Act of 1862, what it did was it provided for all the states in the Union that were not in rebellion, because we're at the time of the Civil War. All the states would get 30,000 acres of federal land out west per their representatives in Congress, and they could use that resources, that land. They could sell it, and they would take the proceeds from that land to serve as an endowment. The other part of it to keep in mind is that those federal resources would only be part of what it would take to fund these institutions. So prior to the 1860s, states like West Virginia, state governments were not really involved in funding higher education. So states had to pick up the rest of the funding, and this was the real beginning of public higher education in the United States. So West Virginia had not been a state for very long when the Morrill Act passed, and a few years later, those resources were used to establish the institution that we all call home here in Morgantown. That's the kind of background story of how we got West Virginia University, and we stay with kind of an ongoing debate and discussion of what that land grant heritage means for our current practice.
Thank you. Thank you for that background. I think a lot of people talk about the land grant mission, which we're going to get into here in a bit. But I think, folks don't necessarily know where that came from. So thank you for sharing. So, from all of the courses I have taken with you over the past few years and some of the places I've lived and worked, I know that many of these land grant institutions with roots in the mid 1800s are faced with this challenge of trying to adjust to changing times and evolving populations of students and states. So bringing that forward to 2021, what timely challenges do you think are facing some of these earliest land grant institutions, and what pivots do you think will be required to advance them into the future?
Yeah, I think one of the central parts of my work is that the land grant idea, the land grant mission, is not a static thing. It's an evolving thing from the beginning. So even if we go back to the early history of the land grant movement, it was presenting a real different mission in American higher education. Previously, American higher education had, pretty much been small colleges, a very small part of the population, probably 1% of white males attending higher education by 1862. And most of the students were studying Latin and Greek and classical studies. But the Land Grant Act presented something for a new age, a changing country. First of all, it was opening up the opportunity for more people to be able to study in higher education, right? People that had been previously excluded from the opportunities of going to colleges and universities. So by supplying public funds, there was an opportunity to keep tuition low, to provide opportunities for those that maybe not had previously not been able to afford higher education. But the Morrill Act itself also spoke to the curriculum and the purpose, and spoke to the study of agriculture or mechanical arts like engineering and other practical subjects that were making sense for a changing world. So from the beginning, we can say the land grant has a history as institutions, but it has a history of mission as well, something uniquely practical to serve the state, a changing economy, and a changing society. So as we move forward, these debates stay with us, right? As we move into not just the 20th century to today, but what is the responsibility for these unique institutions, land grant institutions, to be accessible, to provide opportunities for West Virginians and individuals across other states to have an opportunity to attend higher education. But also, how can the curriculum, the research, the activities of these institutions improve the state, develop the society, the economy of the states that host these institutions? So that's probably a broad kind of picture of this ongoing debate. But if we think of the big ideas that were there with us in the beginning until today, it's how are we accessible? How do we provide an education that's meaningful, that's useful, that serves the state? And how do we take the knowledge, the teaching and learning, and the research, whether it was research in the 1860s on fertilizer and new farm technologies that would improve farms or improve trains and transportation, or today, how does our research connect to develop the Hyperloop out in Tucker County that's going to be a moving transportation and innovation in a new era in this state and beyond? That connection, that link between higher education and the state is central to what the land grants are about.
So I'm so glad that you mentioned that and that you tied it back to WVU, because that's my next question, honestly, because we hear so often in talking with faculty members and researchers here that their work and their purpose is deeply tied to WVU's land grant mission, right? Especially when we talk to folks in the Statler College and folks in the Davis College and folks who work in Extension. And, President Gee and university leaders talk so much about the land grant mission and its and its relevance to WVU. So why do you think it's such an important piece of WVU's identity?
There's a metaphor of the university that's probably been around since the medieval era, of the university as an ivory tower, right? As something disconnected from society. The monk sitting in the monastery, unconcerned and disconnected from the people. This is the exact opposite of the land grant idea, right? We engage in the advancement and dissemination of knowledge, right? Whether it's teaching and teaching undergraduates, teaching graduate students, faculty members engaged in research. But if the research is just about the faculty member themselves, right? Or if we're keeping it in the tower, right, for our own purposes, that's not the land-grant idea. From the beginning, it was we're advancing knowledge, new discoveries, innovation. We're taking the best and brightest in a community, and we're sending them back into that state to advance and develop and grow the opportunities for everyone that is supporting, putting resources into that land grant institution. So when I think about faculty members, students, researchers engaging, giving back to the state, that is central to the land grant mission, because we have great capacity at our institutions to solve problems. In our communities, in our state, we have a host of problems, from poverty to opioid epidemic, to student learning, to health, to a pandemic that we're trying to get individuals vaccinated. The knowledge that we have within our institution cannot stay in a tower, right? It must be disseminated into our state, engaging with the people, lawmakers, community leaders, doctors, lawyers. Everyone that is working in industry to be able to advance the state. Knowledge dissemination, advancement and dissemination of knowledge is core to what makes land grant institutions special.
And, we hear that often, right? So, typically, with the exception of the past year, right, we travel often to hear the stories that our alums have to tell about their time at WVU and their passion that they have for West Virginia. And it is not infrequent that folks ask us, I might live in California, I might live in Texas, but how can I help and how can I give back to the state in a meaningful way based on the knowledge and the career that I have. And so, it extends far beyond just a student's time here at WVU. It's very meaningful and lives much, much longer than those couple years that someone might spend here in West Virginia.
The multiplier effect of taking knowledge out of a university or advancing minds and returning them to communities is hard to measure, both in uplifting communities, advancing industries, economies. The multiplier effect of the investment that we make in our state universities, that they return to our host communities, is tremendous.
Absolutely. And so a few years ago, I know WVU launched the Center for the Future of Land Grant Education, which I think continues to be the only research center in the country focused exclusively on land grant institutions and their policies and their success. So could you tell us more about the purpose of that center and the types of research that are contributing to this kind of advancement and dissemination of knowledge?
Yeah, sure. Let's be honest that the land grant institutions are at a crossroads. Okay, if you are, you watch the news, you know anything about colleges and universities, public funding, public support of all of higher education, but land grant institutions as well, has decreased. Right, increasingly higher ed institutions are funded by individuals, tuition. We serve our students. We're focused on student learning and serving our clients. But there's a concern, right, that there is skepticism in the public. You can read major polling data that looks at the population and says, what is their view? What is their confidence in higher education? Is there a return on investment, not just to the individual, but how does our investment in our land grant institutions return value to our states? And we have skepticism at multiple levels, citizenry and in legislatures at both the state and national level. So when we look at land grant institutions, in some ways it's about restoring a covenant, a partnership with publics, but we have to do it in new ways, right? Obviously, when the land-grant institutions were founded, several years later, we had the Smith-Lever Act that gave us extension. This was all legislation and a movement based in an agricultural era. Our extension program still does a lot of important work and outreach, but obviously we're not serving the same farm population, right? We are engaging in issues of robotics, biotechnology, right? We are these new transportation endeavors that I mentioned. All of this work is valuable, but we need to think about moving forward in a new age. How do we engage these new partnerships with publics to solve the wicked problems that we face in society, but also move our states forward? And we have to look internally. We have to study what we do at the Center for Land Grant, for the Future of Land Grant Education. We have to study how higher education institutions are structured. What are the land grant synergies within our institutions that facilitate engagement, that facilitate teaching, learning, research to engagement and practice, and to dissemination. So how do we build those internal structures? What do we need to learn about the societies, the communities that we serve, right? How do we strengthen those partnerships from service learning to outreach to research to practice, technology transfer, developing of patents to industry? It's a big field, right? And the economy our society is much more complex. But the key is we have to bring these two groups together. Higher education is the best bet for West Virginia. The future is not in the past for this state. The economy of this state cannot be resurrected from the past, right? It has to be built forward. And that movement forward depends on knowledge, new knowledge, research and technology and innovation. That's the brighter future for West Virginia. And that's what many states are concerned about, right? They're concerned about how their land grant institution is providing access to a broad part of the population. So the Land Grant Center looks at not just access policy, federal aid policy, state financial aid policies and procedures. So we focus on all aspects of this mission, right? And how land grant institutions can be structured, reformed, and developed as we move into the next several decades, that the land grant is not just a footnote, that we're not at the crossroads at the end of a great experiment in American history, but that we are at the beginning of a great, exciting age where the land grants can spur the development of the states moving forward.
Well, I'm very excited to see what more comes from the center, certainly, and so I want to talk a bit about I know you are both a department chair and a faculty member, and you have the opportunity to help prepare future scholars and educators and student affairs administrators, right, in this greater field of higher education leadership. So, for those who might be unfamiliar with that, could you talk about some of the courses that you teach and some of the topics that you find to be most critical, specifically in preparing this next generation of scholars and practitioners in the field of higher education leadership?
Yeah, no, thank you. I'd be very happy to talk about our program. I want to say that I think what's exciting about the WVU higher education program is that, being that it's tied to the Land Grant Center, tied to the study of public higher education policy and public higher education institutions, is that we provide not only a lot of coursework, but we actually have a lot of students that are doing really good research, like you, Meredith, in land grant institution contexts, right, that are doing this work of looking at not just land grant institutions, but we definitely have a specialization in that area. So we're getting a lot of good research coming out of our students as well. But if we look at our coursework, we prepare a host of students at the master's and doctoral level that are going into mid-level and senior level positions at colleges and universities across the country. So I teach history of higher education. I'm trained as a historian. So, I provide a good contextual background so students can understand how higher education changes over time, so they can understand the way these organizations are structured and for what purposes. We have coursework that really looks at the how the administration, the structuring of higher education is emerging today. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of rapid reform and change. Higher education has been under great pressure, not just financially, the pandemic, having to rapidly to respond to a host of issues. So really looking at an administration through an innovation kind of lens in terms of how are we reforming these institutions, the structures and processes within our institutions. We also, I think, have a great strength in the area of diversity. As we look at higher education's, one of the most significant, important, and critical ways that higher education has changed over the last 25 years is that higher education has become much more diverse in terms of its population, but much more work is to be done, right? We need to make sure we're preparing practitioners and leaders to be able to lead institutions that are reflective of the diversity of our society that we're moving into. It's not just that we're preparing the next generation of leaders. It is within colleges and universities where the challenges that we face in a broader kind of society are being worked out, are being discussed and challenged and debated. So I think that that's a strength. We also, in our master's program and in our doctoral program as well, obviously a lot of our students who come to us want to work with students. Either at a senior level or working in residence halls, working in student recreation, working in orientation, advising. These are folks at the front line of really making sure that our students are served, that they're making sure that they are developing, getting the most out of their experience, persisting, staying, being successful, finding careers afterwards. So it's a really exciting type of program where we both study higher education and where it's going, and we're actually preparing the leaders and practitioners that are bringing that work to the forefront. So when we're doing it well, and we like to think that we do, is that when we are studying cutting edge research and the newest ideas, kind of at the frontier of higher education reform, that our students who are studying in our programs to be practitioners are coming in fresh. They're coming in at that frontier to be able to work with diverse populations, to be able to address the challenges we're facing, to have the outlook of an administrator that can really move higher education institutions forward at this moment.
Well, thank you for that. I am, as you know, very grateful for the time that I spent in that program. And in fact, the Land Grant Center is one of the reasons why I chose to come to WVU to complete that program. So I am always willing to share my positive experience, and it's hard to believe that that it has already come to an end. So before we move on to the rapid fire questions to get to know Nate even better, I want to remind the audience to share any questions that they might have in the comment section below. And so, Nate, I am going to ask you 10 very important questions that you'll want to answer as quickly as you can to help us get to know you a little bit.
Okay, great. Okay.
All right. So first up, what are you currently reading?
Okay, so during the pandemic, like many folks, I was spending a lot of time by myself, out walking in the woods and spending time in nature. So I found great comfort in returning to my earlier loves of Thoreau and Emerson and reading Walden. Reconnecting to those romantics, so they helped me get through that pandemic time So I think that's the things I was reading for pleasure most recently.
All right, next question. What is your favorite meal?
My favorite meal. Well, I have to say that I'm kind of see, I have a at home I eat really well, right? Because my partner is a fabulous cook and make sure that I eat well. But when no one's looking, if I can get a cheesesteak and not feel guilty about it. I'm from northeastern Pennsylvania. I've spent my time in eastern Pennsylvania, Philly cheesesteaks. Um, if I can get a nice big cheesesteak and not feel bad the next day, that's my favorite meal.
I would not mind cheesesteak from Gino's right about now. All right, Nate, what's your favorite spot on WVU's campus?
Okay, so I don't know if this is a popular one, but I am a closet PRT fan. So, and this is for a couple reasons. When I came to WVU and to visit the campus, there was a fabulous faculty member who has since retired, Ernie Gorez, who was one-time dean at the College of Education. And he took me on a PRT ride, a private PRT tour, but it malfunctioned, and we ended up down at the maintenance shed for about 30 minutes. So that has a good memory, but I don't get to spend as much time with undergrads. And I like to say to my students studying higher ed, I love to get on the PRT to hang out with the undergrads in their natural environment and listen to what they've been up to during the week and the weekend. So it's historical significance when you're on the PRT. There's nowhere else you could be in the United States. There's no other campus, so the PRT is my favorite.
My campus ecology professor, Dr. Morrill Dunn, would agree with you that that's a very important space to learn from students about what's going on campus. In fact, from my window right here, on a normal day, you could see the PRT coming by.
Yeah.
All right, next question. What's something interesting that you recently learned?
Well, I think this has not been immediate, but WVU's College of Education, and it's not often actually probably discussed as much at the College of Ed as it should be. But I'm very proud to say that our program, the higher education program, its predecessor, which was then just called a Master's of Education program, was the program that desegregated higher education in West Virginia. So in the 1940s, higher education, before Brown versus Board of Education, if there was not a separate but equal place for a graduate student to go, and there was no other place in the state of West Virginia where you could get a master's degree. So there were 4 African-American students who got their master's degree in what was then called educational leadership, which was the predecessor to our higher education program. And that is how West Virginia education became desegregated. So I'm proud of that history of our program. I've been learning more about that, and I think I'm going to have my history of higher education students do some work on that history this coming semester.
Thank you for sharing that with us. All right, next question. What do you like to do when you are not working?
Yeah, so I like to. I haven't been as successful as I would like. We have. We do quite a bit of kind of gardening, and I've been trying to develop a vineyard to produce some of our some own homemade wine. We had our first effort with our grapes this past year. Did not go perfectly well, but this is something we like to do. The other thing I like to do, of course, is to coach my daughter's basketball team, which is, my two, getting outside, youth sports. That's pretty much is what my life is these days.
Well, hopefully you'll have better luck with the vineyard next
Second year. I think that's what I've been told, and it's looking better. I'm seeing some good early signs that we're going to have a robust crop this second year. So you'll have me back, and maybe we'll do a wine tasting episode if you're. I don't know. I don't see. I'm trying to be a repeat guest already, and that I think that's poor form. I'm sorry, but
we would love that. All right. Next question. What's your favorite WVU tradition?
This is an easy one for me. My daughter is a huge soccer fan and soccer player. So we started to attend women's soccer game, and obviously they're fabulous, a great program and a great bunch of ladies, very talented group. So we go to a lot of those games, and I don't know, when they win a game and they play Country Roads at the end, and all the little kids go down at the front of the stadium, and all the soccer players take their time to come around and slap hands with all the kids, that little girls that want to be soccer players. It's just a really cool moment of community, and it's easily my favorite tradition that I get to witness.
Oh, I just love that. What's a song that you can listen to on repeat?
Any Tony Bennett. I saw Tony Bennett in concert. I kind of have the music taste of maybe someone a few generations after myself, but any kind of American standard. But I can listen to Tony Bennett. It's usually in my office on repeat all day. Makes me happy. Blue skies. Things are going well. So any Tony Bennett on repeat is fine for me.
What's one thing you cannot live without? No pressure.
No pressure. I'm having trouble picking. Netflix. No, there's probably much better answers than that.
That's okay.
I don't know. Streaming service. I was so late to know that all this existed, and then I got streaming, and then I don't know. I find myself watching multiple episodes of things in a row, and then I don't know what happened, and then they get me buying more streaming. I didn't even want Apple streaming, and then I heard about this soccer lasso show, and I had to see that, and then I watched the whole 2 seasons or 1 season in 2 days. So, well, but of course the answer is my family and my friends and all that, but otherwise streaming.
Yes. Well, in July, when season 2 of Ted Lasso comes out, I can guarantee you where I'll be, and it's also on a streaming service. All right. What is one thing you wish you had known in college?
I wish I had known not to stress out and just take classes that I was interested in. Mm-hmm. I think I spent. And I feel very privileged that I was able to do something in my life that I was very passionate about, that really connected with my interests. But I feel like myself, and I think a lot of other students, spend a lot of time saying, if I'm not in this class or this program or this major, how is this going to connect with with a certain outcome? Always trying to see down the road of how it's going to translate. And it's really difficult to control. And I think so many people who are looking to hire smart people out of college just want to have passionate people that worked hard, that did really well in college. I'm not saying it doesn't matter what you study, but I think if you follow things that you're passionate about and take those opportunities, good things will follow. So I think there's, on the academic side, classes I wouldn't have taken that I thought I should have taken, and classes I didn't take the time to take that I would have really enjoyed.
I agree with you very much on that. And our last rapid fire question for you: what does it mean to be a Mountaineer?
I have been, since the 10 years that I have been here, I have been consistently amazed with how much the people that are at this institution are committed to this institution and to this state. There is a community, even if you're not from West Virginia, that we are all in it together. And I think if you look at not just the challenges, but the opportunities for this state, we have led in several things this year, right? People have listened a little bit that West Virginia is on the move. There's something happening, and I think while there is a commitment to honor the past and honor the traditions of why Mountaineers are together, I think there's also a shared commitment to climb higher, go first, move forward. And I think when you have a community that's so tightly linked in shared values and shared goals, I think that's possible. So those are some things I think about being a Mountaineer.
You're absolutely right. And one of the most special parts of my job in working in alumni relations is hearing those same types of sentiments and stories from every Mountaineer who I get to meet. And it's really special because every story is different, but the heart of every story is the same in their connection to this place. And so, for those of us who have come here from different places and found our home, it means quite a bit. So I'm glad that you feel that as well.
Yeah.
So I have some questions for you from the audience. If you'd like to answer some.
Sure.
So I'll just get started at the top of the list, and we'll answer as many as we can. So our first question for you tonight: how did you identify land grant institutions as your focus for your research?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to study the history of colleges and universities. I went to an institution to study with probably one of the greatest historians of universities in the United States. But I was mostly interested not in land grants first, but I was interested in how higher education changed with a changing economy and a changing society. So higher education had been pretty similar from Oxford and Cambridge to Harvard to Princeton and onward. But when you get into in the middle part of the 1800s, you really get a changing society. So for me, land grant institutions were at this intersection, this fulcrum of a changing world, where I could get in and look at how higher education, the purpose, the mission, how we're going to structure the society would be contested. And my last book, Land Grants and Popular Revolt, is really about that tension. How are the different sides that are trying to debate what America will look like moving forward, how they use the land grant institutions to really frame that debate and try to capture and control what land grants are going to be. So it didn't necessarily have to be land grants, but land grants were a perfect mechanism for me to study what had become my interest of how college and universities changed in response to a changing economy and society.
Thank you for sharing that. Our next question from the audience: what is your favorite class to teach?
Well, I teach the history of American higher education every fall. So that is absolutely my favorite. I mean, it's the reason that I went into the field to study college and universities. I'm able to bring my own work to my students, to defend my ideas. I hope and encourage them to challenge and disagree with my ideas. So that makes it very fun. The students love when I teach higher ed and pop culture the most. I enjoy that as well. We get to watch movies and read novels and look at higher education historically through the lens of how it was captured in film and fiction. So that's a very fun class for everyone. So I would say those are a couple of my favorite.
You're making me want to come back to the classroom. All right, our next question for you from the audience. What initiatives, perhaps small or large, do you believe WVU could build on to push West Virginia forward, like you started to speak about earlier?
Yeah, I think there's multiple places where we can look at successful integration between WVU and the community, right? You can look at our innovation center, right? The work out of Chambers. This is very kin to our land grant mission of saying, how are we taking this knowledge and providing opportunities for entrepreneurs to develop that capacity that they can then take that knowledge and support them in developing firms, developing products. How are that's just one straightforward example. We can look about the ways that we're facilitating research to solve problems, right? We can look at the opioid epidemic. We can look at the ways in our mental health and wellness kind of program that we are taking that research and building partnerships through hospitals, building partnerships through schools, through clinics. These are any place that at the institution that we can find those links, we can evaluate ways that we can do it better, right? So we look at extension, for example. We know extension is in all our counties. They're doing important work in bringing knowledge, information, supporting local communities. But we can look at that, right? We could think about the ways that we can leverage that connection, that open door, and how can we connect that partnership with our partnerships with schools, right? With our partnerships with rural hospitals. So all across WVU, you can find engagement, right? You can find research to practice. And it can be in student learning, like the Innovation Entrepreneur Center. It can be in research to product, like in agribusiness, right? New agricultural technology, new patents, and developing of products. Or it can be in direct service and engagement. How are we solving, using our knowledge and expertise to get out into rural health systems, help support their development? How are we out helping with ongoing challenges like the opioid epidemic? All good examples that you could point to.
So a similar question, perhaps, how have you seen land-grant universities operationalize their missions in new ways in response to the pandemic?
Yeah, I think this is central, kind of, for us to learn from this moment in what has worked and what hasn't worked, right? I mean, you can look at numerous examples in our own state in terms of our successes with vaccine testing and vaccine distribution. Who was at the front lines of this? Our pharmacy students, right? It's one small example to look at how our teaching and learning in one program being facilitated through our network of WVU Hospital and other partnerships to support a state mission I mean, obviously, we had the state czar for the pandemic was, head of our hospital system, and we already had that connection. But that's what land grants are supposed to do. I think we're going to look at a lot of institutions as we look at some of the challenges that state governments faced, public health administration, and we're gonna look and we're gonna see where were land grants able to leverage and be successful and support, and where did those break down? Because obviously it's a mixed bag out there in terms of testing response, vaccine, and supporting medical capacity. It's hard to generalize. I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but it's hard to generalize because a lot of land grants are different. We're a land grant institution that's also connected to a major hospital system, which makes the story different than other land grants where that's separate. But I think looking across, there's a lot to learn. And the story should be land grant universities played a major role in this public health crisis.
Absolutely. There are many more successes to celebrate that we haven't even reflected upon yet. So I'm excited to see that kind of reflection play out. I have two more questions for you from the audience really quickly. Sure. What was your dissertation on, and how does it relate to the work that you do now?
Yeah, the dissertation was, my foundational dissertation was really based on that initial concept that I pointed out. How did higher education in the United States respond to changes in American capitalism in the early 19th century? So it really was a history of early land grant development, largely in New England. And the dissertation was really about one thing. Okay, a little footnote of history. You might not know that Yale, Brown, Dartmouth were all land grant institutions originally. The Morrill Act didn't have to create new institutions. It could go to previously existing institutions. So those institutions were the original recipients. In the middle part of the land grant movement in the 1870s and the 1880s, farmers looked at those institutions and said, they're not doing what we think they should be doing. We don't think they're serving our population. They're not being as accessible as we want. We want to take the land grant away from these institutions. So I studied that contest of ultimately how those land grants, how that funding was stripped away and new institutions were created, which ultimately became the universities of Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. And that, not just being an interesting story, was, as I said earlier, a moment for me to study how land grant, the identity of land grants were debated around different visions of what the country was going to become. Would the country, should the country move in different directions, and how would the land grants support that? And teasing out those debates in my dissertation was kind of critical to get my my study of land grant institutions started, what is now many years ago.
Thank you for sharing that. And lastly, our last audience question for you: what advice do you have for an aspiring faculty member?
Do not try to guess what the magic thing to study is that will get you a job, right? You cannot control the market. There's challenges in pursuing a faculty career, but it's possible. It's most definitely possible. We have an aging professoriate. We need to get new ranks of faculty members. But the key is, just like with my early advice about when I was an undergrad, you got to be passionate in your study, right? You really have to commit to that idea of advancing understanding and advancing knowledge of that area, right? Of that core area. That's the key idea of the job. And that passion, that expertise, that commitment, people want to hire folks, right? With that ability, that expertise. and then go for it, right? So you can't control all the other, who's going to have openings and what's going to be possible. What you can control is your commitment to the craft. Study what you're passionate about. Work hard, and then go from there.
Well, hopefully there are some aspiring higher education faculty members who are tuning in tonight. So if some of our audience members would like to get in touch or stay up to date with some of the work of the center, what's the best way for them to do that?
So you can visit our website. You can visit the landgrantcenter.wvu.edu. You can follow us on Facebook at WVU Land Grant Center, or on Twitter at Land Grant Center, and follow some of the things that we are doing. You can also follow us, the higher education program. If you want to learn more about that, when you go to the Land Grant Center website, you can, of course, be connected to our higher ed programs as well to learn more about how we prepare and train folks to be the next generation of college and university leaders.
Well, Dr. Sorber, thank you for spending your time with us tonight. I know there are lots of questions that we didn't get to answer, and I'm so glad that you kind of gave us this overview of your research in the center and shared some of your story with us. So thank you for doing that. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time. Good night.
Absolutely. We'll see you on your return visit to the WVU Alumni Webinar Series.
I will keep you posted on the wine production. Thank you.
All right. See ya.
Bye now.
So as we conclude this episode of our 5-question series, we hope that you will join us next week as we speak with Dr. Jorge Atiles, the Dean of Extension and Engagement at WVU. We will hear firsthand about his focus on strengthening communities while expanding outreach and programming opportunities that address the needs of West Virginians in all 55 counties. You can join us for that conversation next Wednesday, May 5th at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, let's go Mountaineers.